And interestingly enough, it's held me accountable to reading all these incredible books and meeting all these incredible people. I consider the shattering of my emotional, spiritual, my everything, frankly. I mean, I didn't know who I was or what I was doing. And I think that has prepared me a lot to join with people in their most vulnerable moments where their identities are crumbling. And because our culture doesn't really have an orientation to initiate us into this kind of process, we pathologize it and we think that something is wrong. So I consider it a great gift and, quite frankly, very energizing to be able to join with folks in their most debilitating shatterings. And here I am today. I've been a psychotherapist now for about 18 years. And over that time, I've worked with, I clocked it after a friend of mine retired, and she clocked her hours, how many therapy hours she's done. And I thought, I'm interested, so I clocked mine. I've done 28,000 hours of psychotherapy, knee to knee with people. And I'm a bit of a, I have quite a appetite. I've got a good discipline, and I like to get in there and work. It's been a gift, a total gift, to be with people in the places where they suffer. So I would consider my core orientation is primarily about transformation and suffering.
What if the reason you are exhausted, frustrated, and stuck is not because you are not working hard enough, but because you are forcing your life instead of flowing with it? Today's guest, professional life and business coach Brett Borman, has spent 25 years helping people discover the difference between pushing against closed doors and riding the river of their true calling. In this episode, Brett reveals why you wake up some mornings already defeated, the simple 5-minute practice that transforms emotional chaos into clarity, and the one question you must ask yourself every single day: am I the right person for the job I have assigned myself today? If you have ever felt like you are working harder than ever, but moving further from what truly matters, this conversation will change everything. Brett is about to show you how to stop forcing and start flowing. Let us begin. Well, hello, beautiful souls. We have another beautiful guest for you today. We have Dr. John W. Price. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I know, it's absolute pleasure. And I feel zen. Just being around your presence, I feel really zen. So this is going to be
Communicating
fun.
through time and space. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. So, John, the way that we love to start the show is we always love to ask our guest, what inspired you to do what you do today?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. So I am by trade a psychotherapist. It's a vocation, truly, a kind of deeper calling. And as many psychotherapists, I learned that I wanted to be a psychotherapist on a psychotherapist's couch. So the Jung, as part of my trajectory is that I have a master's in clinical psychology and a doctorate in Jungian psychology. And that means that I really like the intersection of a lot of different playgrounds that include anthropology, philosophy, religion, psychology, and the like, and many others. And so I had been on this journey of my life to be a professional musician from the time I was very young. I started fantasizing about music and in ways that were not understandable to my whole family because they're not artists. And so I was called to diverge from the kind of typical family system dynamic. So at 6, I wanted to play guitar, and that lasted my whole life. I was self-motivated to take lessons. I didn't have parents that were saying I had to learn an instrument or anything. And had they said that, my personality is that I would have not done that. I would have gone completely opposite of that direction. So music was my calling, and I wrote music from the time I was very young. And when I got into college, my first degree, my first bachelor's degree, I was kind of in college because I had to, like not because my I was like obligated by my folks. I mean, I had to from the cultural norms of like that's just what you did in my community. And even though I wanted to, probably nothing to do with that, I never thought I was a very good student. Teachers never got me. I mostly wanted to be smoking in the boys' room. I was acting out in all kinds of ways, and so I had a wildness throughout my whole life. which would of course lead me into the therapist's office. And so my first degree was what it was. I was just in school. I got a degree, but the whole time I was playing music, and things were going really well. And I started to expand and excel in that world. And I ended up signing a record deal when I was 24 or 25. We were touring nationally, and uh, and then everything came crashing down. I mean, I think that not only my tendency toward excess, which I was a good time. I mean, I was that my excessiveness was not harsh. It was just wild and good time, I think. And essentially that lifestyle really sent me on a path of a collision course with my own destiny, which involved very briefly, because this I could write a book about this little blip of time I'm going to spend 30 seconds on. Essentially, I there was a child, my son was born, and I had met somebody through that period of time, and we had a child together, and very quickly realized that that was not a healthy situation for him, and so we parted ways, and I raised my son on my own. And I say on my own, I mean, I had incredible friends, an incredible family. My brother, you mentioned your brother earlier. My brother was so, we were so close together, and I had incredible people helping me out. But I felt very isolated because of the trajectory of my wildness. Then all of a sudden, I'm pacifiers and bottle feeding and making food for an infant, something I never had any idea that I'd be doing. And through that trauma and crisis, I ended up working with a therapist who was brilliant. I mean, she held space for me so incredibly well. And what I think had been, I'd always been really interested in spirituality. I mean, some of the first books I remember reading were Confucius and The Alchemist and Celestine Prophecy and Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I had all these like radical spiritual dynamics going on, but no container because I had a there was a religious orientation in my early life, which was primarily social, and so which is great, but there was nothing contemplative or there was no depth. You know, it was primarily a social landscape. So when I ended up working with Charlene, that was my therapist, she really had a grasp on meditation and Buddhism in particular, and so I started experimenting with Buddhism and got hooked really quickly. So I dove headfirst down into that space. And it taught me a lot about what I didn't get in my childhood. And what it also taught me is that I have probably a practitioner's heart. And as I was sitting with Charlene and we were going through options that I had, I was trying to say, well, where can I make the most money in the least amount of time? Because I need to be home with this child. And I was in, I mean, I weighed about 35 pounds less than I do now just from stress. I was in court and in all kinds of, it was really chaotic. So I had a shattering of an identity. I mean, my whole life dream was disrupted. And in that moment, when I looked at Charlene and I said, "Hey, you know what? I want to do what you do," and I started that path. And I then found out very quickly. I went back to school, got another bachelor's degree, except that time I was very invested, and I learned very quickly that when I'm passionate and invested, I am quite a ravenous student. And I've been so ever since. I ended up, as I said earlier, got a master's in clinical psychology and went on to get a PhD in Jungian depth psychology. And then started a podcast right after that, which is called The Sacred Speaks. And so as soon as I graduated with my doctorate, I went into a minor depression because I didn't know how I was going to learn anymore. And that's when the podcast came online. And like you know, you say you do it for love. I thought, wow, okay, I just want to read books and talk to their authors and dig into material. And interestingly enough, it's held me accountable to reading all these incredible books and meeting all these incredible people. So that I consider the shattering of my emotional, spiritual, at my everything, frankly. I mean, I didn't know who I was or what I was doing. And I think that has prepared me a lot to join with people in their most vulnerable moments where their identities are crumbling. And because our culture doesn't really have an orientation to initiate us into this kind of process, we pathologize it and we think that something is wrong. So I consider it a great gift and, quite frankly, very energizing to be able to join with folks in their most debilitating shatterings. And here I am today. I've been a psychotherapist now for about 18 years. And over that time, I've worked with, I clocked it after a friend of mine retired and she clocked her hours, how many therapy hours she's done. And I thought, I'm interested. So I clocked mine. I've done 28,000 hours of psychotherapy with knee to knee with people. And I'm a bit of a, I have quite a appetite. I've got a good discipline and I like to get in there and work. So it's been a gift, a total gift to be with people in the places where they suffer. So I would consider my core orientation is primarily about transformation and suffering. And that how's that? Where does that leave us? I'll stop there just to open it up.
I'm just going, wow. That's wow. What a story. What a story. I love it. It's obviously through your own experiences, and that's what's really come, well, through you, for you, right? Which is beautiful. You were talking about identity. So you support people that, you were talking about suffering as well. I'm just thinking there's, Jen, there's people, there's so many people, and just from my experience, I'd love to hear your thought on it,
Hmm.
have built such a strong identity around career,
Yeah.
around relationships,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and so from your experience, like
Hmm.
how do you, because how do you break away from that? Like how do you actually trust the fall rather than resist it?
Yeah. That's what a great question. Thanks for this. This is fun because I read all your stuff and I was thinking about great. This is kind of your one of your areas of interest, and it's exciting to connect there because I work with a lot of folks who have tied their sense of self-worth to their net worth. And in fact, our culture does a really good job of enforcing that kind of productivity and production model as the totality of self. And so I think that's a value, like we need to understand that money and productivity and work are certainly valuable, certainly important, certainly at times connected with our vocation, though doesn't need to be. But because of that, because we've done that, a lot of times in my office we have periods of. So I'll put a couple of threads up there. Number one is when somebody realizes that their work doesn't really support what they think it was going to support, and they suffer greatly because, in fact, what we tend to do is cling and hang on to that. And so, in hanging on to that, even though maybe our soul is calling us into different directions, in the gap between where we're currently and where our soul is orienting us is suffering. And we weren't raised in a culture that helps us understand that our suffering is information. It's an opportunity to commune with deeper parts of ourselves that are beneath or beyond our ego orientation. And by ego, I mean the organ, the psychic organ of identity and orientation. The ego says, this is who I am, this is who you are, this is what I like, what I don't like, this is how I exist, this is where I exist. It gives us a zip code for our consciousness on some level. But then it's inevitably going to be disrupted. And because we aren't raised in a culture that helps us navigate through rites of passage and initiation that in fact prepare us to be in destabilizing discomfort, we essentially resist. And there's a great distinction that Jung made, which is natural suffering and neurotic suffering. And so natural suffering is just the cost of doing business in this world we call reality and consciousness as human beings. However, neurotic suffering is when we are trying to push against the flow, the natural flow of reality. And oftentimes, when I have an identity, this is who I am, this is what I do, and yet reality pushes on that, what we tend to do is say, no, 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 but I'm this. And reality is saying, you're more than that. And rather than accept reality on reality's terms, that what we call resistance is actually us pushing against the flow and force of the nature of nature that is infinitely stronger than we are. So, what it will do is turn up the volume on pain points. And pain's a beautiful thing on some level. I mean, I don't want to feel physical pain. However, I'm very grateful I do when I grab the hot stove so I don't continue to put my hand there, or, that I bump up against something and learn that that's a boundary for me. So I think that Mainly, one of the areas that I research a great deal is our culture is built on comfort and distraction and getting out of discomfort. And if we, as the caregivers of younger generations, are really invested in preparing those younger generations for the inevitabilities of suffering, we would in fact show them how to navigate suffering, not how to avoid suffering. But there's a real monetary gain in that because we can certainly exploit that dynamic and say, hey, you're going to suffer. And oh, yeah, use all this and do all this. And I can enrich myself while I'm kind of exploiting a dynamic that is probably unconscious, but certainly painful nonetheless. So I think that identity is shattered in a lot of ways. And then we're left without any kind of orientation whatsoever because we've reduced our identity to our professional worlds or our capacities to make money, certainly. And then we don't have circles to turn to where we can be vulnerable and open up and say, hey, this is what I've been carrying, and have everybody else in the circle go, oh, yeah, me too. And that's medicine. That's when we realize that we as human beings are the medicine for each other.
I love that. And I think that even just sitting in a circle, being able to be vulnerable enough to share that kind of information with one another. Even I think that, I've been privy to some of those circles, and it makes you just think that, wow, I'm not the only one on the planet that's actually experiencing this
Oh,
very thing myself, right? So it
gold,
normalizes it in some way.
gold. Yeah, it does. And I had a mentor of mine one time say something. We were at a retreat and we were walking around and I saw that a bunch of people were in the lunchroom. There were like 300 people there, and we were doing this really deep, powerful, introspective retreat. And I looked at him. He was this priest, a Jungian analyst, and dear beloved mentor of mine. And I said, "Oh, I feel so sad for all those people because they're all bumping up against each other and feeling anxieties and feeling all kinds of things, and they're not able to process it." We were later talking, and I said, I just want to normalize suffering. And he was like, I prefer the word naturalize. It's nature. It's just natural for us. And we, as this woman that I interviewed a long time ago, she's a Stanford anthropological psychologist. I don't know if that's her title, but her name is Tanya Lerman. And I stumbled upon her because I read an article she did for NPR where she looked at individualist versus collectivist cultures. And she was in particular studying the voice of schizophrenia. Like, what's the hallucination or delusion? What's the qualitative element of that voice that people hear? And she determined that in a collectivist culture, well, let me start with the individualist culture. I'll begin with ours. In an individualist culture, the voice the auditory hallucination that one hears in a schizophrenic experience, tends to be malevolent and demonic, and asks for harm to self or others. And it can be really overwhelming and scary and terrifying. And the word demon comes to mind a lot. Interestingly enough, though, in a collectivist culture, the auditory hallucination is oftentimes experienced as a benevolent relative who is a guide. And this is well done. She wrote a book called When God Talks Back. She lived with some evangelical Christians in North America and was engaging their experience of talking to God every day. And so she's done a lot of this work on the imaginal landscape of not only mental health but just normative uh, consciousness. And it blew me away. That one fact blew me away because I was like, whoa, what? Now, granted, there are going to be shadow dynamics in collectivist cultures also. And collectivist cultures need to look at individualistic cultures like ours and try to determine what their shadow is. But for us, we get to look at collectivist cultures and say, whoa, that's pretty significant. So, what might that do to our inner life and what might that suggest about how disconnected we are from each other? How we know from anthropologists that our ideal community is around 150 people. And when we are so, oddly enough, deeply connected, yet feeling paradoxically totally disconnected, it has something to do with our capacity to be in relationship. So when we get in a circle like the one we were just talking about, and you hear me too, and you see people who you trust, who you connect with, who you've cultivated relationship with. That is medicine. It's not Tylenol or hydrocodone or any other medicine. It is us. We are the medicine.
I so agree with that. It's just that we live in an age where there's so much distraction, so much disconnection,
Mm,
so much separation. And then for me, it's like, what are the signs for us that our soul is starving? Is it because, I mean, everything's going so fast. I don't think we even slow down enough to listen to that internal dialogue. So
yeah,
what are the signs that we maybe look for, or maybe I don't know if it's like a daily sacred thing where we, I don't know if you've got any daily sacred rituals that you tap into as a way
I
to
do.
connect with yourself and bring your natural state or self back to life rather than
Yeah.
being that unconscious. It's interesting. We were talking about shadow just yesterday. Actually, last night I was running a class, but just allowing the what I was explaining about the shadow aspect is we're actually denying our full expression
Yeah.
as a soul.
Yeah. You asked about my practices, and I am, let's see, right now it's 2:30. So I am 4.5 hours away from finishing a 5-day water fast. And so for the past 5 days, I've only had water, salt, and coffee and a slice of lemon. I squeezed a slice of lemon in my water earlier. And in part, there are a couple of reasons. I mean, there are health benefits to having a fast like that. I'm well researched. I'm in a good community. I'm very well aware of what I'm doing. And so there are all kinds of reparative things that happen, including a lot of flushes of kind of backed up lymphatic dynamics and systems in the body that finally say, oh, we don't have to just take on. We can finally let go of. It's a great metaphor in there. And also, there's a lot of immune system resets and some changes at the proteins and all kinds of other changes. But essentially, the body is getting rid of unnecessary cells or redundant cells. And there's an incredible cleanse on day 4 and 5. However, days 1, 2, and 3 are incredibly psychologically difficult because there's a lot of urges, and you become very acquainted with the ways in which you're grasping for distractions and food and comfort have covered up a lot of the ways in which your body speaks to you. And we don't even know it's happening until we can have some deprivation. And so I think one of the most important spiritual practices that we can have is deprivation. So having moments of fasts. And unfortunately, our culture has turned all of our religious ceremonies and experiences into kind of trivialized Hallmark experiences. I love Halloween, love it. It's great, but if you look at what Halloween is really about, it is not about dressing up in costumes and getting candy from your neighbors. There's an element of communion with death, with the recognition that life is impermanent. And we don't like to talk about that or think about that because we like to hide that. We like to hide death. We like to hide aging. We like to hide sickness. We like to hide the fact that we are all impermanent. And I think that, see my comment earlier about being in the flow of reality, essentially we have an addictive sickness in our culture because we are trying to um, bypass the inevitabilities of the flow of existence. And this sets us up at odds with powers and forces that are much greater than our own desire and will. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of practices, but yeah, go on. Sorry, you.
No, because when you were talking, there was first thing. First of all, I wanted to share that I did a 7-day fast in Thailand, so I know the first 3 days was
Yes.
hell for me,
Oh,
John.
it's
Hell.
it's so great.
Horrible,
Yeah.
horrible. Like I
Yes.
honestly thought, I was like, what am I doing?
What do
But
you do? Yeah,
after,
of course.
yeah. When you were saying that, I'm like, yeah, I didn't like it. But then when I came back, I did probably about 6 months ago, I did a 3-day fast.
Yeah.
And it is, It's a little bit different when you're in your community because they had doctors there,
Yeah.
they look after you, they take your blood, all that kind of stuff. It's a little bit, it's a
Yeah.
lot easier. Well, they say it's a lot
Yeah.
easier, which I thought it was, but people go there and do it for a month, John. For, I've met
Whoa.
people that had cleared their cancer and like
Whoa.
completely yeah,
Wow.
amazing.
Wow.
One lady had
Yeah.
a stroke and was paralyzed and so amazing, like just from fasting. So yeah, there was that. And then when you were talking about Halloween, I was just thinking about the different cultures that actually like like celebrate the death. So there's
Yeah.
in France they have a time
Mm.
where even in Mexico, right? They actually
Yeah. Yeah.
celebrate
Yeah.
in different cultures. Yeah, so they actually different cultures do different things. When you were saying, that's why I was having a bit of a smile when you're talking about. I was just thinking of that some countries do celebrate the
They
passing
do. And
over and still give life to that.
yes, and not just to hide it. I mean, I'll speak about in the West, we don't understand how to be with aging. We don't understand how to be with sickness. I mean, go look in a hospital and see real quick, that is not the setting that is a place of healing. Right? Like if we were really back to that thing, if we were really raising our younger generations to be prepared to move through the inevitabilities that we all experience, then our culture would be set up differently. Similarly, if we were really invested in healing, we would be creating spaces for healing that are in service to that. We would also know about these kinds of dynamics, like fasting and what it does. The body naturally knows how to heal. I love modern medicine. I'm not I don't mean to contradict any of what we do currently by saying there's something wrong. My friend Jeff always says this. He researches the paranormal and consciousness, and he says, look, our scientific models aren't wrong, they're incomplete. And so they don't serve the greater whole because they have vested interests. And I can get cynical about that too. And so, yeah, fasting, that's so cool that yeah, I'm learning more and more because now that I open up about it, people are like, "Oh my God, I did that too." And so what, can I ask, why did you do that? What was the purpose?
Yeah, I was on the verge of another burnout. So it was, yeah. And I have this thing
Yeah.
where I don't know, and this is going back to that, for me, it's the whole identity thing. It's like I'm here to be of service. And
Ah,
so I just don't know how and when to stop because I love what I do. So I actually don't feel like I work a day in my life, but at what
yeah.
cost, right? So
Yeah.
I'd already experienced a burnout. So I felt it coming on. I knew my body was like, Catherine, it's time to stop. So that's why
Mm,
I knew that if I was staying in my space, I couldn't say no. So I went to Thailand, did a bit of research, and I did it for many things to clear. I mean, I was going through lots of changes as well. This is probably about a
hmm.
little while ago. But for me it was really to heal my body, to rest, to clear and let go. Because I think it's like for me, it's not about always accumulation of information and stuff.
Yes.
Sometimes it's just about releasing, letting go, and just to be. And
Yeah.
sometimes that's why it's I always think that we're so distracted. There's always something to do. We're always
Yeah.
on. And I think that for me, what I have learned over time, and so I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I have my morning
I do
ritual.
too. You and I have a
I
lot
do a
of like
morning
this.
ritual.
Yeah.
So I do my meditation, my journaling. But do I
Yes.
have to get up that time of the morning to do it? Like, why can't I? And then to stay in that state is the other thing, right? To stay in that state when you come into I call it. I mean, I'm always very big on we create our own reality, and if things don't work out, I always look at it like if things are not happening externally, I always go, okay, well, what are you thinking, feeling, for you to project that into
Yeah.
your
Yeah.
environment and create
Yes.
your paradigm and reality when it's not real. It's actually you manifesting it all the time. But we need to slow down to make those
Mm-hmm.
changes. So that's why I went away 7 days by myself, met some people there that were actually had already been it. Like after the first, I felt so guilty that I thought I was going to die after day three.
Mm.
And but like I said, they have doctors. They take your blood pressure. They do like they get you stuff to drink as well because they do clearing like
Mm.
colonics. Like I'm talking about the
Whoa.
old fashion colonics.
Yeah.
Like
Wow.
not the
Great.
machines. It was like a literally a bag over a bamboo stick, and it was next level. But
Wonderful.
I tell you what, it transformed me to the point where I was too scared to eat after that. Because obviously they give you food slowly to come out of it. It was just like there was something after, I think about day 4, like I said, 4, 5, that's when it was, I feel amazing. But that
Oh,
first
great.
3 day, hell.
Hell, I know. Yeah, I was achy. Lymphatic drainage was it was rough. And but then when you have a what I think when I think about spirituality, I think about a value system that is broader or yeah, broader than the pain. And so then we have meaning and purpose for what we're doing. And so I do think that that dynamic about health and then also a kind of spiritual orientation, which is I need a practice of release, of
Mm.
cleansing. And that's not me doing it, the me that I think of when I think of me or I. It's the deeper, more primitive and core aspects of my body's wisdom. And I had some really I was I was telling with somebody I had this I was in a meeting yesterday and I had this fantasy for like an hour of ballpark nachos, just totally like not something I ever eat, but and I thought, well, that's really interesting. I'm not hungry here. I'm hungry here, and it's something is my I'm desiring, and it's my and so there's what happens is we look clearly at the addictions that we have, the compulsions or the conditioning that we have that we get to look at in the face and experience. It's not an intellectual thing, and it's an experiential thing. And I think after it, you go, well, I can do hard things. That I think I would define that as a rite of passage. That imagine if our culture actually said, no, this is something you do in order to prepare yourself to work through your compulsions of eating and hunger and soothing and how you soothe yourself when you eat. And my gosh, aren't we in a culture that just says, go get an ice cream or eat that massive bag of candy at the
Or the
at the
ginger
movie theater?
biscuits, the ginger crunchy biscuits. Because when you were saying that, I was just, I don't do it anymore after that fasting. But you know what I used to do? I used to spend a lot of time in my pantry. And so,
Oh,
yeah,
yeah,
and it
yeah.
just, and I realized it was my, like, it was when something that I was, trying to, it was always an emotion. It was when an emotion came up,
Mhm.
and whatever that kind of emotion was, it could have been anger, it could have been grief, it could have been shame, whatever it was. But I felt like I had to go and lock myself in the pantry. It's going to sound really weird. Everyone's going to go, oh my God, she's weird. But I used to go in the pantry, but I used to look for the biscuits or look for I don't buy them anymore. I used to even hide them so I couldn't see them out of sight, out of mind. But then I knew they were there. So
Sure.
it'd be climbing, and it was
Yeah.
this real weird emotional trip that I was
Mhm.
going through.
Mhm.
And after the fasting, it's gone.
Yeah, because we don't even know, all right? This is beneath our conscious. We don't even know the addictions that we have and the longing that all this research on microbiome is so important because it's like there's a city in there that is sending messages and intuitions and desires up to your maybe higher order consciousness that you end up living a tape that's not of your depths. It's of your conditioning. It's because we eat all that crap that we end up needing more of that stuff. And of course, in a culture that, they say that I always hear that when you go to the grocery store, you should shop in the L, which is the just around the edges, right? The dairy, eggs, meat, veggies, fruit. But all the other stuff is all the processed stuff, and you want to just stay out of. That's where the biscuits are. You and I are the same there. I love God, I love all those things. So I want to like one thing. There's something that I really enjoy. You mentioned the book of shamanism earlier, and I think I've been quite interested in kind of certainly shamanic medicine, in particular in South America. And I've talked to a number of folks that do a lot of work down there. And one of the criticisms that a lot of these indigenous folks have of westernized cultures is that we are consumers. We have storage units. We have attics. We have basements. We have stuff everywhere. And thinking back to identity, thinking that is us. And I lived in New York City for a while, actually. And when I moved kind of quickly because I had a cool job opportunity. And I took my entire apartment and I put it into a storage unit. And then when I moved back, I moved in with my now wife. She was not my wife then, but she was one of those incredible and has been basically my son's mother since he was 4. And I say that because for a while he was getting connected with her. Then eventually she was called mom, and so she was initiated, which was beautiful. So during that time, I took my entire apartment and put it in a storage unit, and then we didn't move into our home where I opened up that storage unit until 2.5 years after. So all the stuff that I had, mine, I didn't need. I didn't even go to the storage unit. I didn't use it. But that was a cool experiment in deprivation, in fasting. I had a fast from my gear. And so this idea of we essentially have created an industry of pills to take regularly to manage symptoms of our body, mind, heart, spirit that are communicating with us issues that are happening on all those levels of consciousness, but we are not initiated into a tradition that helps us learn how to interpret those various symptoms as signals, as parts of us that are seeking to be connected with. So then what we do is we feel the discomfort, and in the culture of, wow, we don't want to feel discomfort, we push it back down with all the things that we eat. We will smoke it, have sex with it, drink it, snort it, distract from it, scroll it, do whatever, but never, rarely, I should say, rarely do we listen to it. And I think that's certainly back to my therapeutic orientation. I mean, that's in large part what folks come into my office wanting to quickly get rid of the symptoms that they're experiencing. And that it takes a while to help build trust, number one. I mean, because I can't do anything if somebody doesn't trust me. So I help build sufficient trust, and then I'm able to gently help them understand that the things that they're trying to run from are actually of part of their interior wisdom tradition in many cases. And that wisdom tradition is needing them to learn a language of their body, mind, heart, spirit that doesn't speak to them in words. And so then we start to engage that and listen to it. And then it turns into different forms: visions, ideas, images, dreams, symptoms, pain, memories. And we start to learn the contours and the language of psyche. And again, trained as a psychotherapist, I didn't not have that language until I was trained as a Jungian. I was trained in pathology and sickness in my master's. And I've moved away from that now. And so I think that I applaud you that you, number one, intuited the burnout, because you and I share a lot of similarities, and I'm sure our discipline and our habits and appetites. But then to know that and to say, well, I need deprivation. And for people like us that are, going, that's an absolutely necessary practice.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, when you were saying, I mean, our body is always speaking to us, but are
Yeah,
we listening? And sometimes, you
absolutely.
know, we numb the pain, through medication without actually,
Yeah.
and that only just it really just puts a band-aid over it, but you're not really dealing with the cause
That's
of
right.
what's creating the pain in the first place. It could be, I know for me, I used to get a lot of migraines. They've actually gotten better, but it was when I really spoke to what I was experiencing, boundaries. You know, that's what my
Oh,
body was saying. But what I was doing is creating, this is how smart the body is, creating, manifesting migraines so I could take a break without feeling guilty.
mm,
right?
Mm.
And so then when I,
Yes.
so
I
then
mean,
it,
I'm sensitive to your pain, but yes, I totally get it. Yeah.
right? But when I actually say, okay, what exactly is it? And I just sat with it. It's just I've got to learn to say no and have boundaries. I don't have to manifest these migraines so that I could take a break without feeling guilty.
Yeah. 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 Isn't that the case? I
Yeah,
mean, the way that we play hide and seek with ourselves. Totally. Yes. And there's such and that I listen to our humor, I see you smiling, I'm smiling, and it's like, yeah, it's scary and that was painful, right? Your fast had pain. I mean, you said, God, I was going to die on the third day, and there's like this, you're submitting to something, and there's a large part of your body that's going, stop this right now. I need this, but we don't. And that's the crazy thing. We've learned, because we are, if anything, we are incredibly adaptive, and so that's the humor, I think, is really what we need. Because when we get together in circles like this, and you go, "Oh, you too, me too. Oh my God, yes, me." And when laughter is the perfect response.
yeah, 100%, 100%. But I think also too, because you talked about shadow, I had so many insights and revelations, like honestly, and I think that I realized that it was the first time that I could say, I love you to myself and actually
Oh,
have no resistance to it. And so I actually realized that I did a lot of shadow. I mean, I'm huge into the shadow work, the stuff that I actually denied and repressed,
hmm,
that really wanted to come through me for me. So
yeah.
that quiet time and the fasting really, I mean, probably day 4, day 5 is when I really had the epiphanies and some of the writing, probably the most profound journaling I've ever done.
Wow, yeah. You did it really well. That's exciting that you had that time and space to be reflective, and to, we say this, like a dear friend of mine is a Methodist minister, Jungian, and just a beautiful heart, Bill Curley. And he said recently, a quote from John Sanford, actually. So there's a little lineage there. John Sanford, this Jungian analyst, said, not engaging, this is be a paraphrase, not engaging a dream is like not reading a letter from God. And I think that's what integration work is all about. Like, are you actually paying attention to the images, memories, fantasies, symptoms, dynamics, signals of the deeper elements of your own consciousness? And most of us say, well, no, I'm not. I'm oriented to the outer world and what I'm going to do, where I'm going to make money, how I'm going to do this, what's my clock, what's my calendar, what's my time here, like all these other value systems that are covering up from those deeper, more intuitive, more intrinsic uh, elements of our psyche. So you seem like somebody who listens to that.
It took practice. I mean, it's taken a long time to get to where I am, and I'm still learning. I definitely haven't professed it. You
Mhm.
talk a lot about pain and suffering, and I guess
Yeah.
this is I guess you were saying that suffering is something that it's well, we're all familiar with it because I think that
Hmm.
and I'd love to hear from your perspective the difference between pain and suffering, because I understand that pain is inevitable and suffering
Yeah.
is a choice, right? And suffering is what we keep alive with through the narratives from the pain. I could be wrong, but
No,
this is how
yeah.
I'm thinking, like we manifest our own suffering by hanging on to these old narratives that no longer serve
Yeah.
us, correct?
Yeah, and I totally, it's a semantics thing. I mean, we're talking about defining terms, and people define their terms in all kinds of different ways. When I think of pain, I think of physical pain. I think of the physical body, and essentially that pain is a protection. It is our protector to help us know our boundaries and where we can be physically hurt. And so my pain is that, if I get cut, I have that, I need to learn how to move back, or like something bad is happening, I'm leaking blood, or there's a pain in my organs, I need to go to the doctor and get this checked out. It's a signal that helps me understand something beneath my awareness is letting me know that there's a problem. It's like an alert system. And suffering, there's a more existential, psychological, and spiritual element to suffering. And kind of earlier, I mentioned that there's a natural suffering and a neurotic suffering. I really like, Jung's framework of that. But of course, anytime I'm thinking about suffering, I immediately go back to the Buddha and the kind of core story of enlightenment there, because he he has this experience of opulence, and his father is basically, the story is, and sorry for anybody who's heard this, I'll just engage it for a second, but his father is the king and Gautama is the prince, and his father hears a prophecy that his son is going to be a holy person, and his father's like, hell no. No, this is going to be the prince. He's going to take over the kingdom. Essentially, on a mythic kind of level, he's saying he's going to continue to order his life in the way that I've ordered my life. And so that's what we see in this kind of, he's getting his father's way of existing. And that's a metaphor. It's not necessarily speaking about an actual palace, even though there may have been an actual palace. What happens in these kind of lineages is that the one before says, this is how you will live, and the one after says, I don't want to live that way, I got other plans. So his father sets him up, and with everything, he's got all the sexy women and concubines and food and drugs and all the stuff that you could ever want, music and all, hedonism, pure hedonism, pleasure, pleasure. I'm going to keep you here, is what he's saying. And then one day, Gautama, I think it's how you say his name, uh, leaves with a servant and leaves the house and goes to experience life, and experiences several things. He experiences death, he experiences aging, he experiences great poverty, and he experiences hunger, and he experiences a holy person. Death, age, I think that's it. And he says, whoa, that's like, there's a reality there. Like there's a nature and a way of being outside the hedonism of my father's attempts to obligate me or manipulate me into living his life or his expectations of how I should live. So he leaves. He leaves his family, leaves everybody, and goes to live in the woods with a bunch of ascetics. And he eats like one piece of rice every day, and his body depletes, and he's horribly malnourished. And eventually he's like, well, this isn't either. Like, I've just gone from one pole to the other. And so he comes up with this middle path, the middle path, finds that. And then goes to sit beneath this tree of enlightenment. And he sits beneath this tree for a long time. And he's, this energy field keeps, like what you did when you fasted, right? You should eat. You should stop this. What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Like, those voices come up and they're trying to get us off our seat, get us off our core value that we're trying to embody and embrace in that moment. So, who would become the Buddha? He's sitting there and he's kind of at war with himself, where all these images and memories and fantasies and ideas and disruptions and temptations are coming to him. And eventually he becomes enlightened, and he has this idea of the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths are, there is suffering, there is a cause and a reason, a kind of origin point of our suffering. And the reason is because we attach to pleasure and we try to avoid pain and suffering. And then there's a way out of suffering, and he called that the Eightfold Path. So he basically, this very simple and elegant, beautifully Buddhist thing is like, hey, there's a way out, and it's eight: right breath, right practice, right relationship, so on and so forth. But I think that's one of the fundamental teachings of this contemplative tradition that was extremely important to me. And I think it's what I think of, and certainly reference whenever I do think of suffering. And Jung's distinction of neurotic versus natural suffering is that, hey, look, dying is going to be really painful. It's going to be really fucking scary. It just is, right? You're going to get anxious. You're going to feel pain. You're going to start looking back on your life and thinking of the things that you did or didn't or shouldn't have done or should have done. You're going to have a lot of discomfort. So wake up to that right now and start that journey. Wake up to that inevitability. Start cleaning yourself. Start cleaning your perspective, because that is the reality. This world is impermanent, and you will suffer that burden deeply at the end of your life, or you can suffer it now. Suffer in that context, I mean, carry it. Brene Brown did a great job of using suffering in her book. She did the etymological evaluation of suffering and says the word means to carry from beneath. And so that's consciously suffering means that, like, I'm all over the place here, but the Greeks had this axiom: if you die before you die, you won't die when you die. And that's part of the nature of, if we expose ourselves to discomfort in meaningful, powerful ways, we ready ourselves because we've done it before. We've been here before. This is what people in the psychedelic world are looking at when they talk about ego death. This is what people fasting experience when they see the urges and longing, and they know not by their mind but their heart that there is an end to this. There's another side to this. I can lean into this experience. I don't have to be so neurotically terrified by experiencing something I've never experienced before. So, in some way, your fast is a kind of readiness process, not only to help you navigate your day to day today, but you will draw from that as you age and as you move into death. And that scares the shit out of people because certainly in the West, right? Because we preserve bodies, we try to remain young for our entire lives, we resist every ounce of the flow of nature, and so then we neurotically suffer, and then we are consumerists.
I love that. You know, it's interesting. I don't have a fear of death.
It's
It's
incredible.
Yeah, I don't actually not afraid of it. It's and then I don't know.
Hmm.
I've never had. It's inevitable. I think
Yeah.
it's one of those things that we probably need to think more of in the sense of
Yeah.
for me it's
Yes.
like live every day as if this is your last
Yeah.
because you never know when that time for transitioning will take place. So for
That's
me,
right.
I don't see it as an end. See it as a transition. And I have no proof of that, but it's just this. I don't see it as an end. I love the suffering piece because I think so you're saying we all experience it absolutely because I mean that's how we evolve and grow. Because I think
Absolutely.
if I go
That's
back
right.
in my
Yeah.
timeline, some of the hardest things I've ever gone through in my life have been the most profound. They
Yes.
shit at the time, but
Yes.
like obviously when going through them, the evolution, the growth, the transformation that's taken place, we've actually let it go, which is,
Yeah.
it goes back to that identity you hang on to. It's like, what would I be without that? But the moment
Yeah.
you let it go and back yourself, and I think that's going back to what I was saying that when I did the fasting about for the first time to be able to say, I love myself without the resistance because
Hmm.
that's another thing that's been bantered around. Love yourself, and just I mean, what does that mean to love yourself when you have a strong inner critic, or
Hmm.
a saboteur? We're talking about Carl Jung, and he very much talks about
Yep.
these psychological archetypes that play in that deep unconscious part of our mind that we're not aware of most of the time, but they're there. And I've
Hmm.
I've played with that a lot too. I mean, that's the other thing too, like to create a bit of space and give it a
Yeah.
name. If you name it, containment. And I was able to really kind of like understand it for what it was because it did serve a
Yeah.
purpose. Yeah, when you
Oh,
actually work
yes.
with these, they're not bad. They're actually there. I mean, I'm not an expert on it, but I feel that somehow we've given birth to these psychological archetypes for a reason at a time, maybe based on safety. I think that when I worked with mine were all based on keeping me safe in some way, shape, or form.
Yep.
Now, do they serve me today? Absolutely not. Obviously I've done a lot of that work, but they have a purpose. They have a reason for being and even a benefit. I'd love to
Yes.
hear from you.
Yeah. Thank you for all that. Yes. So the first thing that comes to mind is I love that you brought identity back in. There's an image that I love very much, which is the hermit crab. And I I've been using this with my clients and patients for years. The hermit crab felt like a really interesting and obvious um, opportunity to engage in this metaphor. So the hermit, this actually happens. I've done the research into the hermit crab. This is how it goes. So the hermit crab is growing and growing and growing, and it's doing great. And it's got a shell that all of a sudden is not big enough. And so it gets uncomfortable and it doesn't fit, but it really is scared about going out into the world and releasing the shell that's been its home. And so the hermit crab ostensibly gets ready to leave, and it is in its most vulnerable moment ever will be when it unhooks itself from its previous shell. When it's found its new, this is brief, right? It finds a new shell, great. Hermit crab releases and it moves into the new shell. Well, we've got three dynamics that are happening here. The home that becomes too small, the motivation by discomfort, as you said, right? So that's we would call that healthy suffering, healthy pain. That it doesn't quite fit, right? So it moves out vulnerable in this time of liminality, of being in between. It's not quite there, not quite next. So it's in between, and it can be hurt deeply. And then it gets in a new shell, and guess what? It's uncomfortable there too, because it's a little too big and it doesn't quite fit. And it's got to kind of move in. And who was in the shell before me anyway? And so I think that's a perfect image for what we resist, because we cling. There's a kind of, you mentioned in one of your conversations about homeostasis, that there's a kind of homeostatic tendency in our minds and our brains, essentially, that we want familiar, predictable experiences. And our adaptations neurologically we're incentivized to seek out the predictable and familiar. So to leave in service to your largeness, in service to your growth, feels like what I felt like once when I did a bungee jump. I was a young guy. I was like seventh grade, and I did a bungee jump. It was 150 feet up in the air. I, I, Everything in my body was like, "This is fucking insane. There's no way I can do this." And of course, I took the leap and I screamed all the way down. But Lord, was it fun once I started realizing, okay, this is fun. But that mentality of going against your protection, don't do this. And that's something that I think we need to have. This is like one of the greatest therapies in our first half of life is exposure therapy. Like just expose yourself to what is uncomfortable. Albert Ellis, this really early psychologist, came up with rational emotive behavioral therapy. And he was a guy who had no idea how to ask out a woman. He was in college. He was so anxious. He was so insecure. He had never asked out a woman. And he was like, I'm terrified of this. But what a badass. He essentially says, I'm going to ask out 100 women over the next period of time, whatever it is. And so he succeeds in his experiment. He did not get a single yes. However, his intention was to expose himself to his discomfort. And so essentially the experiment works because he time and time again faced up to discomfort, went in service to a higher value system, and therefore satisfied the um, perceived need for protection that our anxieties and our fears tend to represent. And so the hermit crab to me is one of the more powerful.
I love that story, and I'm right there with you. I mean, I share this with the team, and our motto is get comfortable with being uncomfortable because that's where the
Yeah.
magic happens. Because time and time again, I see a lot of high performing leaders are the ones that don't stay complacent, that look at what
Mm.
can I do next that's scary, that's
Yeah.
going to challenge
Yeah.
me, that's going to be different, right?
Yeah.
And there's no certainty in that, but there's
Hmm.
variety in it, and that's what draws them into because they know that's where the growth happens.
It's funny you said that word certainty. Yes, I totally get you. And I heard this a long time ago that this single most common trait amongst highly successful entrepreneurs is risk taking. And I found that like, whoa, that's so great. So you said certainty for a second, and I want to go a little spiritual for a moment. My mentor Richard Rohr talks about how religion serves two purposes: control or transformation. And often, like we primarily don't know a religion of transformation in our period of time. There are plenty of places in organized church traditions where you can get that. And I happen to be very deeply connected with a number of priests and clergy who are doing incredible and exceptional work because they have an amazing theology. And their theology is one of transformation. They're meeting people where they are to try to help work through their suffering and transform who they are and how they are. However, a lot of organized traditions are creating control. And on some level, that's part of the dynamic that happened early Christianity was this very scared Roman populace that was saying, holy shit, these people are saying go within, where all roads should lead to Rome. What are we going to do? Well, let's knock them out of the picture, adopt their religion, and subtly shift the dynamics in the religious tradition to reconnect every one of those individuals to Mother Rome. And I actually, my mentor Richard is a Catholic priest, so I need to say, like, I think I don't mean to reduce all religion to that. I just simply think that if we are looking at religion, we need to be a bit conscious and critical of some of the control strategies that organized traditions all use. That's organized traditions that are religious based, politically based, economically based, corporations. Be very, very aware of control based strategies and some of the dynamics that these control based organizations will use to get you, to get your eyeballs, to get your money, to get your organization orientation, to get your community aligned with their. And that's back to what I was talking about with Siddhartha, where that's back to that father image of, like, you will live how I want you to live. This is how you need to live. And when you deviate, I try to get you back in line. And so that core story is really about a process of individuation, where that individual says, I'm kind of caught in a structure that's certainly meeting my needs. It's certainly providing for me, although there's a cost to a more soulful element, which is that I'm not content here. Something that whispers inside of me beneath my conscious awareness is nudging me into new endeavors, risk taking, powerful adaptation that resists kind of systematic, what do I want to say? Compliance in the population. Okay, I'll stop there so you can.
I just totally agree with everything you just said. Absolutely. And the other thing too, when it comes to, I mean, certainty in my eyes, my only experience does not exist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the illusion. Yeah, isn't it so true? Yes.
Yeah. Does
Yeah.
not exist. John, I think we're going to have to get you back on the show. You're fascinating. I'm sitting there going, I mean,
Well,
I
so
just
are
looked at your
you.
time. So we will have to get you back on the show because I didn't realize we'd gone a little bit over time. But I'd love to maybe go to our 3 shiny golden nuggets as we always do as we start wrapping up the show. This has been
Thank you.
amazing. And I haven't even gone through my questions yet. There you go.
Well, you're
And so
fun. I mean, yeah,
we're going to
obviously
have to
we could
get
do
you
this a
back.
while.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
But the way that we wrap up the
Yeah.
show is we always love to leave our guests with 3 shiny golden nuggets. So, John, what would be those 3 shiny
Yeah,
golden
thank you. I
nuggets?
think that probably I referenced what when our body speaks. One of the ways we speak is what we call emotion. When the body speaks is emotion. And so I teach I teach an online group actually called the Open Gate, which is I've written, I think I have 36 months of content for this group, and it's all about we look at each individual emotion as an initiating presence in our life. And so each time we meet, it's an opportunity for us to take jealousy or sadness or shame or cynicism or boredom and reframe that so that the people who are, so that we all can be more conscious and aware of how each emotion is a teacher. Then I also have written an article on Substack called Sacred Refusal. And I think that, like in Siddhartha's story, there's when we stop performing and imagining that we need to comply with systems that are not necessarily in service to our soul, we have to refuse them. And my mentor, Jim Hollis, says any win for the self, capital S, or the soul, we could say, is experienced as a death by the socialized ego. It's why we leave our family systems. It's why we have to create our own journey. It's why you go on into the wilderness and experience new realities. And then I also think that it's important to, this is one of the things I'm writing about in my book, to resurrect myth as magic, to recognize that we are stories in a story, storying ourselves. And so we see life as a sacred text, not as a self-improvement plan. It's a way of not getting better, but experiencing more completely and fully. And so, yeah, every emotion's a teacher, refusal is devotion, and live mythically.
I resonate with all 3, and you speak so eloquently. I think that's what draws people in. You've just got, because you were saying about building trust was your first thing that you spent time on before you start getting to
Yeah.
work with your clients. But it's like even before when we were talking about, I think it's just you just naturally have it. I don't know anyone that wouldn't be like drawn to you because there's this softness about you. It's beautiful. So I
Thank
just
you.
wanted to share
Thank
that
you.
with
I
you.
received that. Thank you. What an honor.
Yeah,
Thank you. I
yeah.
really appreciate you having me on. What a gift.
No,
It's been a lot of fun being with you.
it's been a gift for me. So, and I know for our audience as well, I just want to say thank you so much, John. Definitely, like I said, we'll get you back in 2026. You're a
Amen.
fascinating. I didn't get to unpack all the things that I wanted to unpack, but this has been a beautiful conversation. I want to say we'll have
I
everything in
agree.
the show notes as well, your
Good.
links and all that. But I just want to say thank you. It's been an honor and a
Thank you.
blessing. Thank you so much for coming on the
Yeah.
show and sharing your time, your
Thank you.
energy, and your wealth of wisdom.
What a gift. Thank you. And anybody listening, check out the website and sign up on the newsletter. There's plenty more where that came from.
I will have them all on the show
Thank you.
notes. Absolutely.
Good. Thanks,
Thank you.
Catherine.